Breaking tonight, Ottawa just received a $19 billion warning signal from Washington. The Pentagon didn't just fail another audit, they exposed a question Canada can no longer ignore. Tensions are mounting across the defense establishment this evening. Prime Minister Mark Carney committed to 88 F-35 stealth fighters years ago, but instead of delivery certainty, the Pentagon just revealed 238-day delays, unaccounted assets, and an 8th consecutive audit failure. The question isn't whether America's most expensive weapons program has problems anymore. The question is whether Canada should stake its sovereignty on a platform that Washington itself cannot properly account for. Everyone believed the F-35 was inevitable for Canada. Defense analysts assumed no credible alternatives existed. American contractors expected Ottawa to absorb delays and cost overruns without question. Military planners treated the Lockheed Martin relationship as unchangeable reality. They were all utterly incorrect. Ottawa, December 23, 2024. Standing in the Prime Minister's office, sources close to Mark Carney's defense review team quietly began circulating a question that would reshape Canada's entire procurement strategy. If the Pentagon cannot account for its own F-35 spare parts after 8 years of trying, should Canada trust this platform with our national security for the next 40 years? Translation: Carney just told Lockheed Martin that Canadian sovereignty is non-negotiable. And what happened next reveals exactly why Canada's defense diversification strategy is accelerating while America's most expensive weapons program collapses under its own weight. Dear viewers, the document released by Pentagon auditors on December 19th wasn't just another failed financial review. It was a masterclass in institutional dysfunction that should concern every Canadian taxpayer who assumed our $19 billion F-35 commitment was backed by American competence and reliability. Let me walk you through what actually happened, because the implications for Canada's defense independence are staggering. The Pentagon's Inspector General identified 26 material weaknesses and 2 significant deficiencies in financial controls for fiscal 2025. But one finding stood out with particular relevance for Canada's procurement decision. The Department of Defense could not account for assets in the F-35's global spares pool. Read that again. The global spares pool. The very system that's supposed to ensure Canadian F-35s can access replacement parts when needed. The mechanism Ottawa was sold as proof of international cooperation and efficiency doesn't have verifiable records of what actually exists, where it's located, or what it's worth. The auditors were direct in their assessment. Because the DoD is unable to provide or obtain accurate and reliable data to verify the existence, completeness, or value of its global spares pool assets for the Joint Strike Fighter program, we could not quantify the material misstatement in the DoD's assets. Think about what that means for Canada's operational sovereignty. If Washington cannot verify what spare parts exist in their own system, how can Ottawa guarantee our fighters will be maintained when tensions rise? How can Canadian commanders trust mission readiness when the supply chain itself is unaccountable? This isn't theoretical concern. This is $19 billion of Canadian taxpayer money betting on an American system that has now failed 8 consecutive financial audits since Congress mandated reviews in 2018. But the December audit was just the latest warning signal. 3 months earlier, in September, the U.S. Government Accountability Office released findings that should have triggered immediate alarm bells across the Canadian defense establishment. Every single F-35 delivered in 2024 was late. Not some, not most. Every one. The average delay was 238 days, nearly 8 months behind schedule. That's a dramatic deterioration from 2023, when average delays were 61 days. Let that timeline sink in for a moment. In just 1 year, F-35 delivery performance collapsed by 290%, and the GAO identified the cause. Technology Refresh 3, the hardware and software upgrade that forms the foundation of Block 4 modernization, is failing. That program is now expected to cost $6 billion, more than planned, and finish at least 5 years later than projected. Here's what the GAO found that directly impacts Canada. The Pentagon paid millions in incentive fees to contractors to improve on-time delivery, but the contract structure allowed Lockheed Martin to deliver aircraft up to 60 days late and still earn bonuses. Translation: American taxpayers, including Canadian partners in the joint program, were paying contractors to be late. And the situation is getting worse, not better. The numbers tell a story of institutional failure. F-35 acquisition costs, including development and procurement, reached $485 billion as of December 2023. That's a 10% increase from just 1 year earlier and more than double the original baseline from 2001. Total lifetime costs, including sustainment, now exceed $2 trillion. Canada's 88 aircraft fleet represents a fraction of that total, but Ottawa is locked into the same dysfunctional system. When Lockheed Martin misses deadlines, Canadian squadrons wait. When software upgrades fail, Canadian pilots fly with outdated systems. When spare parts go unaccounted for, Canadian maintenance crews improvise. This is the reality of defense dependence. And Mark Carney's government is repeatedly asking a question that should have been asked years ago. Why? Sources familiar with Ottawa's defense review indicate that Carney is weighing whether to proceed with the planned 88 F-35s or diversify toward a mixed fleet. That could include Sweden's Saab Gripen E, a platform that's capitalizing on exactly the F-35 delivery and cost concerns that just hit new lows with the Pentagon Audit. In 2025, Colombia and Thailand ordered Gripen EF fighters over American F-16s. Switzerland, facing strong political pressure over its $9 billion F-35 order due to Trump-era tariffs and trade disputes, is reportedly reviewing the deal. Even the closest American defense partner, the United Kingdom, is debating whether to increase Eurofighter production rather than pursue further F-35 acquisitions. The pattern is consistent across allied nations. When American dysfunction becomes undeniable, alternatives suddenly become attractive. And Carney's team has options. After winning April's federal election, the Prime Minister advocated for greater diversification in Ottawa's defense and industrial partnerships. That stance was underscored by the Security and Defense Partnership signed with the European Union on June 23, 2025. Translation: while Washington struggles with audit failures and delivery delays, Ottawa is building relationships with European partners who can actually deliver reliable platforms on schedule. France's Dassault Rafale just secured a 26 aircraft deal with the Indian Navy. Sweden's Gripen is winning contracts from nations that previously defaulted to American options. The Eurofighter consortium is benefiting from Europe's push for defense, self-reliance, and industrial sovereignty. These aren't inferior platforms settling for smaller markets. These are proven, battle-tested fighters winning competitions because they offer what the F-35 cannot: predictable costs, reliable delivery schedules, and transparent supply chains that don't require 8 years of failed audits to expose. Spain formally canceled F-35 plans in favor of European alternatives. Portugal's interest is wavering. Even Switzerland, which signed a massive contract, faces political pressure to reconsider as Trump-era tariffs make American defense equipment dramatically more expensive. Here's what Carney's defense review team understands that previous Canadian governments missed. Defense procurement isn't just about aircraft specifications. It's about institutional reliability, strategic autonomy, and whether your primary security partner can actually deliver what they promise. The Pentagon's 8th consecutive audit failure isn't a bookkeeping error. It's a symptom of a systemic dysfunction in America's defense industrial complex. When Washington cannot account for spare parts in its own supply system, when contractors get paid bonuses for late deliveries, when costs double from baseline estimates, that's not partnership. That's dependence on institutional chaos. Canada has invested decades building the F-35 relationship. Canadian companies participate in the supply chain. Canadian pilots train on the platform. The political momentum toward procurement seemed unstoppable. But Carney's approach to governance has consistently prioritized strategic calculation over political momentum. When Trump launched chaotic tariff wars, Carney accelerated trade diversification. When American monetary policy created volatility, Ottawa built relationships with alternative reserve currency partners. When Washington's reliability became questionable, Carney didn't double down on dependence. He started building options. The Defense Cooperation Framework with the European Union, signed in June 2025, wasn't just symbolic diplomacy. It was infrastructure for exactly this moment, when Canada might need alternatives to American platforms that cannot pass basic financial audits or meet delivery schedules. If Carney's government decides to pursue a mixed fleet strategy, including platforms like the Gripen E alongside some F-35s, it won't be abandoning the alliance with Washington. It will be recognizing what the Pentagon's own auditors just confirmed. Betting Canada's entire fighter fleet on a program with 8 consecutive audit failures and 238-day delivery delays is not strategic planning. It's strategic negligence. The question facing Ottawa isn't whether the F-35 is a capable aircraft. The question is whether Canada can trust the institutional systems behind it when those systems cannot account for their own assets and consistently fail to deliver on schedule. And here's what makes this moment so significant. Canada isn't alone in asking these questions anymore. Across Europe, across Asia, allied nations are watching the Pentagon's institutional failures and drawing the same conclusion Carney's team appears to be reaching. Strategic autonomy requires reliable partners, and reliability means more than aircraft specifications. It means institutional competence. When Switzerland reconsiders a $9 billion commitment, when the UK debates Eurofighter over F-35, when Spain cancels outright, that's not anti-American sentiment. That's pragmatic recognition that dependence on dysfunction is not a defense strategy. The contrast couldn't be sharper. While Washington struggles with its 8th consecutive audit failure, European defense manufacturers are winning contracts with transparent costs and reliable delivery. While Lockheed Martin faces 238-day delays, Saab delivers Gripens on schedule. While the Pentagon cannot account for spare parts, France's Dassault signs new deals with growing partners like India. This is what defense diversification looks like when institutional competence, not political inertia, drives procurement decisions. Carney's government faces a choice that will define Canadian sovereignty for a generation. Proceed with 88 F-35s from a program that cannot pass audits or meet deadlines, or diversify toward a mixed fleet that includes proven European alternatives with transparent supply chains and reliable delivery schedules. The $19 billion question isn't whether America's stealth technology is advanced. The question is whether Canada should bet its national security on American institutional competence when Washington's own auditors say that competence doesn't exist. If you believe Canada's defense sovereignty deserves better than 8 consecutive audit failures and unaccounted spare parts, share this analysis. If you think Carney's strategic review should prioritize institutional reliability over political momentum, join 127,000 Canadians who refuse to accept dysfunction as inevitable. Subscribe to Canada Next for the analysis that treats Canadian strategic autonomy as non-negotiable, not as afterthought to American expectations. Because tonight, while Washington struggles to account for its own defense assets, Ottawa has a choice. Continue down a path of expensive dependence on institutional chaos, or build the diversified defense relationships that strategic sovereignty actually requires. The Pentagon just failed its 8th audit. The question is whether Canada will finally stop pretending that's someone else's problem. This is what Canadian strategic independence looks like when competence, not compliance, drives procurement decisions. And Europe's defense manufacturers, professional and reliable, are standing ready to prove there are alternatives to American dysfunction. The only question is whether Ottawa has the strategic courage to choose sovereignty over inertia. Mark Carney's defense review will answer that question, and the Pentagon's 8th consecutive failure just made the choice a lot clearer.